log on. And in the meantime, I would like to draw your attention to the chat, where we'll kindly ask you to please add a short intro, as we won't do a round of introductions of all participants. But we are really curious who we are having in the room today. And again, warm welcome. I'll come back to you in about 2 minutes to kick us off, but giving a little bit more time for colleagues to log on. Hello again, colleagues. Welcome from sunny Paris. My name is Benjamin Kumpf. I work at the OECD Development Cooperation Directorate. And with my team, the Innovation for Development Facility, a warm welcome from all of us. I'm really happy to welcome you to this seminar, which is co-organized with the Global Community of Practice on Scaling Development Outcomes, the International Development Innovation Alliance, the UN Innovation Network on Scaling. And this is a meeting of our I-32 group, which brings together heads of innovation and innovation leads from across the membership of the OECD Development Assistance Committee, and a seminar for non-I-32 members on scaling. Today, we really have a threefold objective. We want to inform you that this guidance exists. And the second objective is provide you an overview, not an in-depth walkthrough of every paragraph, evidently. And the third objective, frankly, is to inspire, because we, together with many colleagues on the call, set out to develop this guidance, not to have yet another document that's approved by the OECD and celebrate its publication, but really thinking about having an approved DAC document that can serve as a reference point for change makers, frankly, in bilateral funder organizations, in ministries, but also in partner organizations that receive funds from bilateral donors, to essentially advance reforms, advance changes in how we go about either investing in innovation or regular projects, programs, or policy work. So with that said, a warm welcome to all members of the I-32 group, and a warm welcome to all the members of the Committee of Practice on Scaling Development Outcomes from the UN Innovation Network and from the International Development Innovation Alliance, a network also consisting of funder organizations with whom we have a strategic partnership and work very closely. And in fact, IDA started work on scaling, which we took up the baton and continued it. Allow me to provide a brief framing of the DAC scaling guidance, because before I will hand over to Manuela Verci from the Swiss Development Cooperation Agency. And afterwards, we have an exciting lineup of colleagues who will share, and I will introduce them one by one, but you can probably already see them, and you've spotted the names in the invite. Ton Driesen from Enable, Carrie Jacobson from NORAD, and Pat Lowe from UN Global Pulse. Warm welcome to all of our speakers too. So why scaling? Why now? It's probably a conversation that we could have for quite a while. And I really try to avoid looking at the bleak news from our sector with a confirmation bias and saying, well, with so much reduced funding envelopes, of course we have to focus more on scaling. But it's hard not to make that point, frankly. But when we started our work in scaling about 2 years ago, things looked already really complex and challenging, but different, arguably, than now. In those first weeks of this year, we have seen, of course, the news from the US, recently from the UK, there are just massive reductions in terms of budget from across the DAC membership, frankly, not from all, but from almost half of the membership of the 31 countries plus the EU. And therefore, 2 years ago, we realized there's the larger picture that leads a lot of agencies, institutions, individuals to look into scaling. But there's also, frankly, so many change agents who at that point in time in DAC member agencies kind of worked on reforms where we felt it's a window of opportunity for us to provide support with bringing these people together, many of you, and develop a policy guidance. So you see those 3 points, they will all be real clear to you, but it was particularly that window of opportunity that led us to get together. We formed a reference group, just as quick background. There's OECD EvalNet, some of you might be members, the OECD Results Committee, and our innovation network, the I32 group. We invited members and had then a group of 20 amazing colleagues who we convened over a year and a half in a reference group. You see the broad strokes of the process that included also a targeted consultation and finally the approval by the DAC. But we see that only as a milestone, and now kind of the real work begins to how might this guidance be used to advance reforms, as I mentioned earlier. And I want to underline before handing over to Manuela that this guidance does not only refer to innovations, but we really make a point by saying we, in our literature review that informed the work of the reference group, saw so many parallels between what needs to be done to scale innovations, so novel solutions, and proven solutions, regular development practice. And this guidance really applies to both. There are significant differences, of course, in the early stages to make the case for unproven solutions for innovations, but later on, there are significant parallels that really allowed us to put the scope on both of these areas. So it's not only limited to innovations, but also to proven solutions. And we won't linger on what does scaling mean today. We looked at the different definitions. We know there are more technical differentiations in scaling up or scaling deep and scaling out. But we propose this common framing of scaling that informs the scaling guidance. And I invite you to have a quick look at that definition on your screen. And what you might pick up that there's, let me be frank, almost a bit of shade thrown at a certain underlying development paradigm that informs some, not all work, which is the illusion of being able to replicate when we work in complex environments. There is, of course, an opportunity to replicate when we work in environments where you can replicate the same exact business process, but that's not most development work. And we really want to underline what everyone anyway agrees with. Context matters, right? And you have to think about adaptation and not just replication in our sector. And with that, I just want to conclude by saying the framework on scaling by the International Development Innovation Alliance informs a lot of our work. My team offers, for example, an innovation portfolio management service with a premium focus on scaling using this framework. And this is where also we saw the parallels. I won't go into the details of this framework. Those stages are probably really familiar to most of you. But I want to underline that it's a messy process. We have heuristics, frameworks to help us think through things, and they look really linear and straightforward, but it's far from that. And I think Manuela will pick up that point when we think about also time horizons in this messy journey. And with that, it's my pleasure to hand over to Manuela, the innovation focal point in SDC, the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation. And Manuela is really leading on linking research and innovation, embedding innovation approaches in SDC's research for development funding, and promotes research results and innovative solutions on the transition to scale across the organization, and has been a really active part. Huge thanks to that, for that again, Manuela, in the reference group. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Ben, and hello to everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and to have the opportunity to talk to you about some key aspects of the new DAC scaling guidance. To let you know, the document is based on foundational work on scaling in international development. So we've drawn on various resources, including the Global Community on Scaling Development Outcomes, IDIA, IDRC, CGIAR, ELRA, and also institutions from our own network, such as GIZ and USAID. And the objective really was to build up on this existing evidence and to create a guidance document that is based on common understanding of the DAC members and that is also officially approved by the DAC. And in terms of content, the DAC scaling guidance has 5 pillars, as you can see here on the slide. But no worries, I won't go through all of them one by one. I just like to focus on 3 dominant themes that are present in the guidance, a bit like red threads if you want. If you go to the next slide, we can see the first one. Yes, thank you. It's the importance of developing a long-term perspective and planning to phase out. The text you see on the slide comes directly from the scaling guidance. And what we would like to point out here is that scaling takes time. So there are studies, particularly from the health and agricultural sectors, that suggest the time horizon between 10 and 15 years to be realistic. So in light of such time horizons, development organizations should not set out to scale a solution over its entire course in most cases. Most development work is delivered in time-bound projects, and so it is essential for any organization to critically consider whether it can and if it should realistically set out to scale a solution over such a long period. Rather, it should reflect on where in the scaling journey it has a comparative advantage. I have one example for you here, one that many of you will be familiar with. It's Kenya's M-Pesa. So in the 2000s, the UK Department for International Development, DFID, which is now the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, noticed that Kenyans were transferring mobile airtime to each other as sort of a proxy for money. And DFID then facilitated a partnership with Vodafone and provided £1 million of investment. And then it phased out its support as M-Pesa went on to scale as a highly successful commercial mobile money system. So DFID played an important role, yes, but only at that certain stage, and also it helped to develop a vision for sustainable scale. And that leads me to the next point on the next slide. That is the importance. That was a bit quick, no? We have more slides in between. But the point is about the importance of a viable business model. So the guidance lays out that there are 2 main pathways for scaling. I just continue while we're waiting for the slides, I suppose. So there's a commercial pathway, like the M-Pesa example, and the public sector pathway. And while virtually all program design and evaluation guidelines across the DAC membership emphasize the notion of sustainability, there is a clear lack in our sector when it comes to planning for viable business models. What we need to do is to assess how ODA can spark change and bring about proven solutions that provide value and continue to have support from funders and implementers long after ODA funding ends. And this is also the link to the point that I just made before. And as I said, such viable business models can be a profit-generating one or a solution becoming part of a public service delivery or a hybrid one. And the example that I'd like to share here pursues a pathway through the public sector. It's the Lively Minds initiative in Ghana and Uganda. Some of you might know it. It operates in settings where education and play are often neglected due to parents' illiteracy and limited resources. And it trains parents in running educational play schemes for preschool children. In this program, catalytic investment and research helped to assess the effectiveness and delivery costs of the program. And after these independent evaluations and also much advocacy and behind-the-scenes work, obviously, the program is now being delivered by the government in Ghana, at least in parts of the country. It is yet to be fully rolled out nationwide, though. There has been a lack of funds in the education department of the country, but there is a clear ownership from the government. And that's the point here, actually. And then the third aspect that I wanted to emphasize today is a clear red that goes through the whole guidance. It's the support of local institutions and systems. What we want to underscore here is that every solution, every innovation needs a clear line of sight to scale. And that depends very much on local ecosystems, for instance, on the availability of financing along the scaling stages, on conducive legislation, on existing networks, etc. And yeah, these are just a few. And I'm sure you all know very well, it's absolutely necessary to invest in understanding and in strengthening local systems. But for many funders, such investments are rather hard to justify. They tend to be intangible and also hard to quantify, and that makes them difficult to communicate to relevant stakeholders, such as Parliament, for example. And this is a major reason why too often scaling is approached in a way that our colleagues from the scaling community of practice describe as transactional scaling, in contrast to transformational scaling. Let me quickly explain this. Transactional scaling is usually about doing more, so having bigger projects, greater resources that cover more regions, more people, and usually both. So it builds on a project view of development that focuses on disbursements, on intermediate outputs, on outcomes within the project cycles. And success is measured by a project hitting its internal targets, like the number of beneficiaries, if you want. And as such, scaling often takes the form of replication, what Ben just mentioned before. Then transformational scaling, on the other hand, targets the size of the problem. So the impact is measured in relation to the long-term target and the scale of the problem. Let's say the initial focus is on creating the contextual, environmental foundations for scaling and viable scaling pathways also, and not so much about intermediate outputs. And there is a strong focus on creating local conditions that produce the desired outcomes. Let me give you an example here of a bilateral funder that is supporting a research institution with developing a more drought-resistant rice variety. After its viability is proven, the funder works on providing 10,000 small-scale farmers with access to this variety by providing financial support. A transactional way to scale this would be to provide more financing, so another 10, 20, or maybe 100,000 farmers would benefit from the subsidy and take up the improved crop variety. A transformational approach, however, would not spend the limited funds in such ways, but rather develop a theory of change that seeks to help shape local market conditions that lead to a situation that enables all small-scale farmers to purchase the new rice variety, and that on a competitive price and basis. This is what we would call systems practice in the guidance. So these were the 3 points I wanted to make, and let me conclude here. I hope this highlighted some major points and themes of the DAC scaling guidance. You will discover much more of it in the document, I promise. We created the guidance for DAC members and implementing agencies. It should be a useful reference for them when driving internal change, like, for example, updating program and project guidance, or designing, assessing, and also evaluating projects. It also helps, and we hope it helps, building a common understanding of scaling. And one last comment, but an important one. As a reference group, we know very well that the DAC guidance in itself does not change anything. So I really encourage you to explore the guidance further and use it to drive change and make a positive difference in your organizations and beyond. And yes, with that, I hand back to Ben and the next speakers who will reflect on the question you can see on the slide now. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Manuela, and apologies for the mess up in the slides. With that said, dear colleagues, we won't open up now for reflections or questions, even challenge to us, which we always welcome. But I want to encourage you, if you have initial reflections or questions, to put them in a chat now. And we'll pick this up in the final session where we open up the floor to all participants. But before that, we really now want to hear from colleagues who actually work on those questions that you see on the screen. And with that, I want to hand over to Toon Riese, bioengineer and anthropologist by training, which I actually just learned. Thanks for sending that background. It's super interesting. Tone is the manager of Enable's Innovation Hub and the innovation lead at the organization, has been a really active and crucial member of the reference group. Huge thanks for that again to you and also Michelle from Enable. Thanks for being here. Over to you.
Thank you, Ben. I'll quickly share my... is it? Well, thank you. Can you go maybe one slide back? I quickly want to introduce to you the Enable Innovation Hub. Actually, it's Enable's key platform to stimulate open innovation within Enable. So we launch call for proposals around broad global challenges. And we try to identify scalable social innovations based on three main criteria. It's their transformational impact, their innovative character, and their scaling potential. And so based on those social innovations, we actually provide grants, we provide technical support, and we also have a peer learning network where we actually stimulate peer learning and exchanges between those social innovations. Exactly. So this is the overview. We currently have 23 projects in our portfolio. We also have 27 alumni projects from earlier programs. So we can actually build upon those learnings as well. We get funding through the EU and the Belgian Development Corporation. And we mainly focus on public and non-for-profit actors, and with a clear focus on Africa, currently covering 18 countries in Africa. And with this Enable Innovation Hub and the call for proposals that we launched, we clearly focus on the first steps towards scale. So we basically target social innovation projects which have already done a first pilot, from which they have promising evidence on impact. And we try to guide them towards their first steps to have impact at scale. So this is the Enable Innovation Hub, and we actually use the scaling guidance actively already in our support we offer to those 23 innovation projects. So you can go to the next slide, please. And how we do this is, first of all, we use it to establish a shared understanding and language on scaling. As already explained by Ben and Manuela, it's really important to kind of make sure we talk about the same thing, and we have a shared understanding of what scaling means and what scaling entails. And in a first phase, starting from this year, we actually adapt our technical support and peer learning activities based on those guidance. So we have those 5 principles that will actually guide us in developing a support approach based, of course, on their needs, the needs of our 23 partners. But we have a kind of framework which is very clear and easy to use and to communicate on what we want to kind of focus on when we offer technical support and peer learning activities towards our partners. In a second phase, starting from next year, we will actually focus on 2 of those 5 principles more explicitly, which is first building scaling capacities. So actually linking between those scaling projects that we are now funding and supporting and making the link with the organizational capacities on scaling. And second is to work on referrals. We want to work much more on referrals because we're very much aware that the short time that we have together with our 23 grantees does not allow us actually to kind of cover an entire scaling pathway. We need to link towards other organizations, just like yours, to make sure we have a more integrated approach where at the end of our support or our partnership, we can actually refer them to other funders and other agencies. And just a picture on the right you see here is one of the examples of a project we supported in our last cohort. This is engineer Baini Mugisha from Makerere University, who actually developed an air quality measurement system based on locally made sensors. And after graduating from our cohort, they were actually picked up by the Google AI Impact Challenge to get funding in order to get a next step towards their scaling of their approach. So for us, this is exactly what we want to do more, linking up to other donors, other agencies, to make sure we have a more integrated approach towards scaling. So for the future, we definitely want to keep on contributing to the scaling guidance, further disseminate it, and continue to adapt it. First of all, to the real world scaling experiences and the feedback from our partners, but also we want to learn from you, from best practices, build upon what already exists, and continue to kind of share the experiences that we have in order to kind of make or to live those scaling guidance and make sure we can actually operationalize the concepts. All right, I will stop here and hand over back to you, Ben.
Thanks, Toon. And it's really good to see Engineer here. He was one of the colleagues from outside the DAC membership who provided really valuable inputs into the guidance, as it was important for us to have a diversity of voices inform that guidance. And if you have any questions to Toon, I actually encourage you to get in touch bilaterally. Objective of this webinar is to kind of spot who's already kind of driving reforms, who's working with this publication, with this paper, right? The important piece is to put it into action. And here you have a colleague and the team at Enable doing exactly that. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Kari Jacobsen from the Norwegian Agency for Development Cooperation, NORAD. And we invited Kari also because here at the DAC, we launched for the DAC from our Development Cooperation Directorate a new work stream on digital transformation. It's the sister work stream to our work on innovation. We will collaborate really closely and put quite a bit of emphasis on digital public goods as an, as you know, interoperable element of digital transformation that aims to be inclusive. And where scaling, really making things stick, of course, is a big objective. And Kari is a specialist and really a world leader in this field. And it's my big pleasure to welcome you. Kari is the Policy Director of Innovation Partnerships at NORAD and works with an emphasis on digital public infrastructure, DPI, and digital public goods, and on integrating innovative approaches across NORAD's portfolio. Kari, pleasure having you here. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Ben, for that, I think, much too kind introduction. And thank you for, first of all, for publishing this guidance. I think I'll talk a little bit about how this is relevant for how we work. And so our main innovation focus at NORAD has been on digital public goods and digital public infrastructure. I'll add some links in the chat to relevant websites on that for those of you who are interested. And through this work on digital transformation, the potential for scale is clear. But it's not always so easy to implement in practice. So we really, really welcome this guidance, as we think it's important to have clear recommendations as well as a shared framework that different members and organizations can refer to. So we prioritize working with digital public goods because of the potential for reuse, collaboration, and scale. And we don't need to reinvent the wheel every time. So by working with digital public goods, we promote best practices for ensuring privacy and data protection, do no harm, and help countries, organizations, and individuals achieve the SDGs. In a way, digital public goods provide an alternative to the way digital transformation has been unfolding so far, emphasizing inclusion, collaboration, openness, transparency, accountability, and country ownership and capacity in this work. So when we're working with digital public infrastructure, which we could define as the key digital components that enable public and private service delivery so that we can foster social and economic inclusion, we see the need to build for scale from the outset. So the partners that we choose to work with there are partners who really are looking at not just here is a small project that we will pilot, but who have this mindset from the beginning. How does this look like at a country level or even bigger as a social scale? So adopting DPGs, digital public goods, that have been successfully implemented at scale elsewhere can save countries and institutions resources and enable lower risk experimentation, piloting, and rollout. Additionally, we emphasize letting demand drive uptake and scaling and support local ecosystems, as we think this is the most sustainable way forward. So in addition, this also emphasizes sovereignty and local capacity strengthening. So we try to not pick winners, but really let the demand drive from the local partners and country partners. So when working with digital public goods and digital public infrastructure at NORAD, we work across different thematic areas and sectors where there can be a tendency for kind of silo and not too much cross-silo collaboration. So we collaborate with colleagues who don't necessarily have experience with innovation or with digital transformation previously. And then having concrete guidance on how to do that and to support us, not just because we believe that this is the way forward, but having this DAC guidance is really very useful for us. So this really facilitates how we can work also internally at NORAD with innovation and with scaling. So very thankful for this, and also looking forward to collaborating with others who might be interested in the field of digital public goods and digital public infrastructure. Thank you.
Thanks, Kari. And I just want to link it back. We've heard from a few other colleagues in DAC member organizations that the notion of an innovation practitioner, a digital expert like you, Kari, I mean, you're both, or a colleague working on evaluation or results-based management for that matter, kind of approaching program and project teams with questions along, what's our vision for scale? Who funds or implements in 10 to 15 years? Going back to the points that Manuela raised, right? If it pertains to a digital solution, you know, if the idea is to build up a website for XY, or to kind of design youth educational programs to enhance occupational skills, the question is the same. And we really see a relevance across sectors, but particularly for digital, where we do have to think about interoperability, scalability, and national sovereignty so much. So thanks for that, Kari. And now we kind of switch from members of the Development Assistance Committee and colleagues who work in bilateral funder organizations to Patricia Lowe, Pat, working as Senior Policy Analyst in the Innovation Scaling Team at UN Global Pulse, based in Helsinki, but joining us today, and thanks for staying up late, from Malaysia. Pat has what I think a fascinating background, starting off as a clinical physiotherapist and then working at a major trauma hospital in Australia before moving into health and medical law, and then specializing in global health and development, and now leading on a number of scaling-related innovation programs at UN Global Pulse. And we were really curious to hear how colleagues in the UN system are advancing scaling practices, in this case, very much focused on innovations, but obviously with the financial support of members from the DAC who also want to see their investments to be catalytic and to result not only in interesting learnings of innovations that actually don't succeed, but in innovations that unfold impact at scale. So with that, Pat, thanks for being here. Over to you.
Thank you, Ben. Thanks for this opportunity, and good day, everyone. Like Ben said, my name is Pat, and I am dialing in today to just briefly describe how many of the recommendations from the objectives in the guidance can and should be used and captured in a tangible way, and why. Slide, please. So over 2022 and 2023, when UN Global Pulse, the UN Secretary General's Innovation Lab, spoke to colleagues across the UN and its peripheries who either worked on or supported innovation scaling, both formally and informally, we learned several things. That innovations tend to go into perpetual pilotitis, that vertical efforts can lead to fragmentation and duplication, that it's difficult to assemble the right ecosystem to support at the right time through the scaling journey, and most noticeably, that the nature of funding development work is incongruous with the long-term and risky nature of supporting innovation scaling. So I'd like to pick up on a couple of key points that Manuela had mentioned earlier. So first, about transformational scaling. So we're constantly testing and learning what scaling means. And we landed on understanding in a way of maximizing the potential impact of an innovation with the elements of sustainability. So transformational scaling and, as described in the guidance, optimal scale really resonate with what we're striving towards. But the impact of scaling can often be very intangible. And like it was pointed out earlier, scaling does not happen overnight. It is also a multi-player, multi-element journey. And so to scale, we realize we need a strategy that lays out key elements to be undertaken in that process, most of which, if not all, are outlined in the objectives of the guidance, such as ensuring it is human-centered, demand-driven for a shared vision for optimal and sustainable scale. This should also come in parallel with local change efforts, because the sustainability of an innovation depends not only on its design, but on how it is embraced by the systems and the people it is meant to serve. Secondly, having a long-term vision, as well as having measurable goals at the same time that would take you towards that vision. And then assessing capacity and readiness of teams and organizational mandates to support the scaling, and at which stage. And we have observed that teams tend to develop the innovation from the beginning often struggle to have the right mix of capabilities to take the innovation throughout the stages of scaling. And the guidance also calls for referrals and to consider whether an organization can and should stay engaged throughout the scaling journey. Fourth, we also ask that we ensure organizational buy-in and advocating for an organizational environment to support innovation scaling at an institutional level. But underscoring these are also knowing how to assemble the right ecosystem for your journey, having the ability to measure the right evidence, learn from it, and to communicate it to relatable audiences. Slide, please. The UN Global Pulse Scale Accelerator was set up with these in mind, and especially to provide UN teams working on piloted innovations with a structured space to systematically work through many of the actions outlined and recommended by the guidance. I will now briefly explain its approach in supporting UN innovation teams, take away a bespoke strategy document that will serve as a living action plan for them. Slide, please. So the next slide shows a summary of the learning journey of our most recent Scale Accelerator workshop series that concluded in November just last year. I know it's a lot of text and it's quite small text as well, but I'd like to just direct your attention to the row with the goals that's circled. Throughout the workshops, teams incrementally develop strategies to scale their piloted innovations, and using applied foresight methods, teams first reassessed the status quo of their innovation to validate its continued justification and demand for it, then develop its long-term perspective for scaling. And then following this, the teams are guided through assessing their current team and organizational readiness for the scaling journey, with a focus on how to correspond to the stages of the scaling vision and the goals. And as an aside, it might also be interesting to note here that teams often come to these workshops already acknowledging that they may not be the team or organization that should see the innovation through its entire course, which makes the next section of the workshop especially pertinent. So mapping the ecosystem of the right entities that would accompany and support the scaling journey at the right time. And especially in the current geopolitical environment, it is essential that these scaling strategies are made to be adaptive and with built-in resilience to withstand future challenges and risks. Now, I'm sure I'm stating the obvious when I say that scaling is not easy. It is a long-term endeavor with multiple players and multiple elements, and we are taking a small step in supporting UN teams to develop strategies that clearly set out an action plan that addresses key aspects for scaling that are also recommended in the guidance. And the feedback we have received so far is that in addition to serving as a structure to taking the first steps in scaling, The scaling strategy document itself has also been perceived as somewhat as a proof of assurance that there is a clear evidence-based plan with expectations that allows risk mitigation. And this has been used to engage decision makers and funders. And we hope it is also being used as a tool to drive reform. But even with solid evidence and good communication, embodying scaling activities that contribute to a shared vision, that has a long-term outlook, that strengthens local and enabling environments, and that prepares for phasing out or referring where applicable. All of these embodied in a living strategy document can take us only as far as having a blueprint, maybe just the beginnings of a bridge to cross that valley of death. But much like the first slide you saw from Manuela's presentation with the circle of the guidance 5 pillars and having scaling as an organizational objective in the middle of the circle, it must be accompanied by reforms and investments that will see scaling support embedded collaboratively, systematically, and deliberately at all levels in this long multiplayer journey to build that further, more solid crossing of the valley of death towards a shared vision for impact at scale. Thank you very much. And back to you, Ben.
Thanks, Pat. Now, I hope it's okay, Pat, if I tell the audience that in my perception, you and your team did an excellent job with preparing support materials for the applicants from the UN system for this fund. And if you work in an organization where you either have an internally facing fund, there's, for example, the GIZ Innovation Fund, which has excellent guidance as well. There are other internally facing funds across the DAC membership and beyond. I do think it makes sense to exchange notes with Pat and her team, as I was really impressed. I had the opportunity to serve as a juror in the jury, reviewing the proposals with the materials that you prepared on sharpening the thinking and doing of UN teams on scaling and working towards scale. So thanks for that. Colleagues, this is the end of the presentations. And now we are going into a discussion and particularly questions, sharing of experiences. But in my experience, a lot of colleagues, for good reasons, sign off now or focus on their emails. And before I lose the attention of colleagues, I want to quickly formulate 3 invitations and allow me to quickly visualize them. They are namely to support the next iteration of the scaling guidance, and what's in it for you is to see your work featured. Manuela added a brief case study, a brief example to the 3 main red threads that she presented today that in the scaling guidance. And we deliberately decided to not go into further detail or more stories because we know, I mean, Tone also, of course, referred to concrete work, and so did Kari on a greater level, but we know that it can be an information overload to kind of wrap your thinking around a specific global health initiative in this country and then agricultural in that country. But we do also know that to kind of make sense of the rather high-level content, we do need to ground it in real practice. And we are currently looking for case studies and collecting them actively, bringing them in one format to then publish an expanded version of the guidance either later this year or early next year. And it's also with the kind support of Enable and the French Development Agency, AFD. Then I invite all of you, regardless of you're part of the DAC results community or not, into a soon-to-be-launched peer learning circle from the OECD DAC results community. And this is an invitation, this and the next one, only to DAC member colleagues. If you want to engage further in kind of embedding scaling principles in how program and policy guidance are formulated in your organization, or even on a higher level, this will be the place to kind of dig deeper and exchange notes with colleagues and work towards that with tailored support for your organization. And the last invitation is, if you are interested in running a short virtual seminar with our innovation team, the Secretariat of EvalNet and the results community on the scaling guidance, either similar to this one or a quite different version, please reach out. We are really happy to kind of share the main insights and to kind of help advance conversations or even reform efforts in your organization Also, if you're a DAC member institution, we would love to work with many other organizations, but we are super small teams and we have to ruthlessly prioritize, unfortunately. But if you're interested, reach out. So those were the 3 invitations. And now I just would love to open the floor for general questions that you might have and reflections on the question that you see on the slide, which I'm going to stop sharing in a second. But it's very much the invitation for you to either share ongoing work, ask questions for clarification, or provide critical challenge to the scaling guidance. The floor is open. And what I usually do is I contact a colleague and ask her if she can kindly break the ice. And she had to cancel her participation last minute. So I don't have that colleague lined up to break the ice. And I hope that my dear colleague Johannes Lin, who is with the Global Community of Practice on Scaling Development Outcomes, might be so kind. And you have your hand up, Johannes. You're amazing. What a reliable colleague. What I would have asked you is if you can highlight in pretty few minutes main insights from the super interesting mainstreaming study that you're currently co-leading. But if you want to raise another point, you're welcome to do so. Thanks, Johannes, for being here, and thanks for your support throughout the journey to develop the guidance.
Thanks very much, Ben. I raised my hand really mostly to break the ice because I was really impressed with the presentations. And of course, we're so delighted that we have the guidance document now. Let me just say I'm Johannes Lin. I'm the co-chair of the Scaling Community of Practice, and all of you participating today are also invited, of course, to join us in our journey, 10-year journey now to support scaling in development and climate action. So what I'd like to just focus on is, number one, that I think in the current crisis situation, undoubtedly a focus on scaling is ever more important if we have, as we will very likely have, many fewer resources available to get the job done. So we really have to be more effective in the way we use the resources, and scaling is the way to do so. So thank you, Ben, for sharing the guidance with us. Secondly, I think we do have some important lessons at various levels of detail. We have tools, we have experience, as we heard today, from a remarkably broad set of organizations. So we really have to just bring together those instruments and those tools. I put in the chat a couple of references that might be helpful to you. One is especially for the evaluation community. We do have a paper that reviews the methodologies and practice of official evaluation departments, and we find scaling is generally not included, and we argue that it really needs to be included in evaluation because evaluation is a critical driver for actually mainstreaming scaling. We also just recently posted a new paper on a tracking tool that allows funder organizations specifically to track to the extent to which they actually focus on scaling in their work. Now, we recognize, of course, that funders are only one of the many actors, and maybe not even the most important one by any means, that need to drive scaling on the ground. And we will, in our future work, very much focus on what we can do as a community to support implementers and also intermediaries to help scaling in the countries in which the development process has to be continued and effectively delivered. So let me stop here, and we'll have separate occasion to invite you all to events that will report on what Ben mentioned, namely a major study that we've carried out on mainstreaming scaling in funder organizations, which has yielded some really interesting results. Thank you very much, Ben, for this opportunity, and best wishes to all.
Thank you, Johannes. And yeah, thanks to you, to Richard, Larry, and so many other, Carla, other members of the Global Community of Practice. I really appreciate this. I see one question in the chat from Jamie. which all of you, of course, can read as well. And I therefore won't repeat the question verbatim, but essentially specific guidance. If you're an organization that used to focus on technical cooperation and now is pivoting towards support for technology and infrastructure deployment and scaling. And we, from our Development Cooperation Directorate, per se, do not have that specific guidance. Where I want to point to is, in addition to the resources Kari shared and Nurad's work, the Digital Public Goods Alliance as part of digital public infrastructure, referring to digital public goods for deployment and scaling. And also what I will add to the chat is a recent paper from our colleagues in the Public Governance Directorate on digital public infrastructure that very much looks at funding principles for that, with a focus on high-income countries. That is OECD member states, but I think very much adaptable insights for development cooperation. If other colleagues on this call have further resources that could support Jamie, I would really appreciate it if you could add it to the chat, please. And thanks, Jamie, for asking that question. Now, I'm of the opinion that a marker of a good workshop is that it ends early. I will not drag out a conversation if there are no further questions. Instead, I just want to thank all. Oh, I didn't see that hand. Thanks, Olivier. Richard, I think you have your hand raised. So
yes,
I'll invite you to add a short contribution, and then we're going to wrap it up.
Yeah, just a few things. First of all, I was, thanks to Ben, the offices, and that of the DAC DCD, I was able to attend the Valnet workshop last week in Paris. And one of the things that really struck me that I just wanted to bring to people's attention was there was a long discussion on the use of AI in development evaluation. And it struck me that many of the things that were discussed were potentially equally quite relevant because, at least from where the scaling community, I should introduce myself. My name is Richard Cole. Along with Johannes, I am the co-chair of the mainstreaming initiative at the Scaling Community of Practice. So back to AI, there was a long discussion on the potential usefulness, but also pitfalls of AI in evaluation. And given that, at least from our perspective, scaling needs to rely very heavily on evidence-based and evaluation at all stages, it struck me as that there was an overlap that I'd like to bring to your attention because I think it's relevant to the scaling principles that we've been discussing today. For example, I think most of us, and the principles for sure, which do emphasize evidence, but one of the weaknesses that we've seen in a lot of scaling efforts is that there isn't a comparative analysis. In other words, this intervention may have worked, or project or innovation, whatever it is, but is it really that much better or cost-effective what else is out there? That often takes a huge amount of time and effort that most individual projects or a country team doesn't have. And at least in principle, AI is capable of doing that. And there was some discussion at the Valnet meeting of various donors, and particularly the UN, shared that they had started putting a lot of their evaluations online, which would allow an AI to say, hey, what else is out there that's comparable? Is this really cost effective and the best thing that's out there, or are there elements of other things? Similarly, as was emphasized today in some of the comments and the presentations, which were fantastic. Thank you so much, Manuela, Toon, Carrie, and our friend who's up in the middle of the night from the UN. The question of context and adaptation is quite critical, and it's very central, obviously, along with localization in the guidance. Context analysis, again, is something, there's a lot of stuff out there that AI can do, as opposed to having to reinvent the wheel in terms of, what were the issues that are the same or different from where we may be working at smaller scale to larger scale. At the same time, and I don't want to go on about this, there were a number of things flagged, questions of biases that for some of you are familiar with AI, hallucinations, they make shit up, excuse my language, and stuff like that. Nonetheless, I thought that the conversation was particularly exciting. Clearly, this is an area that the DCD DAC and many individual funders are going to be pursuing. It's very early days, and I think it would behoove us to think hard about how AI can, both the dangers and opportunities or possibilities of AI for scaling. So just wanted to bring that to everybody's attention. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Richard. And I'm not going to comment on this. I think it's evident to everyone that your point is
for the demo.
So relevant, and a lot of people work on this. Eric, you have your hand up. Can I invite you to come in with a 1-minute intervention, and just 1 minute, please, because I want to wrap it up before the half hour. Thank you so much for being here, Eric, and thanks for your support and being part of the reference group as well.
Okay, thank you. Just in 1 minute, just an evidence. Thank you for this guidance on scaling, because one evidence on scaling is it cannot be done alone. The core of transformative scaling is enabling conditions for sustainability and scalability. We need to make coalition of actors to create this environment. And then if only one founder goes in the scaling approach, it cannot succeed. So the importance of this guidance is everyone in the international community have this scope in mind, and then we will all succeed or all fail. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric, and I really appreciate it. I mean, first of all, also thanks to AFD for the support of this work, and then second, hearing you as a representative from a development bank, from a fund organization, say, hey, let's put our organizational egos and the metaphorical flags we want to plant on solutions and innovations to the side and acknowledge we will not scale something. We will be part of that journey and eventually it'll phase out, and it's about the outcome and not that it's ours. That's not an easy sell, but it's just a realpolitik, and I think so important to emphasize. So thank you for that. Colleagues, huge thanks for dialing in today. Thanks to all of our speakers. The last announcement, if you're a member of the I-32 Innovation Network, or if you work in a DAC member organization and you're interested in the following, then please be prepared for an invite coming tomorrow. Over the next year, we will focus on strengthening innovation and research ecosystems. Manuela talked about the importance of systems practice. We'll zoom into this and look at current different approaches. We'll invite colleagues from African innovation agencies on their views of what funders and implementers are currently doing. We'll look at different frameworks, useful indicators, and work towards better coordination, potentially the design of a common framework to make sense of ecosystems and to assess how we can strengthen it and attribute back effects to the work of funders directly or downstream partners. But it very much links to creating the enabling conditions for scaling that are locally nested and owned. And we are excited for the next part of our learning journey. And with that, huge thanks again to everyone, to our speakers, and we'll be in touch soon. Thanks. So sorry, Olivia, my dear colleagues, stay on for just 30 seconds. There's a survey launching now with thanks to colleagues from UN Global Pulse for setting this up. Please take it. 30 to 45 seconds and provide us with some answers. Mm-hmm. And now we're at 4:30. Thanks so much if you're still working on the survey. Obviously, then it's just a so-called Irish exit. Huge thanks again to everyone, and we'll be in touch soon.